What is the most terrifying thing you have ever witnessed in your life that you are unable to describe? I was going to cross the street when a woman put her arm across my chest and said, "Wait." As I turned to face her, trying to understand what was happening, a car crash occurred, and one of the cars went tumbling down the street to feet in front of me. If she hadn't stopped me, I would have died. Her again, and she is gone. I could see her for blocks in each direction, and I knew where she could have gone so quickly that I wouldn't be able to see her. The only explanation I can think of is that, because the crash was so tragic, I imagine it happening in my memory because I've never experienced anything, even remotely supernatural before or after. There's an effect where you might die, and it seems very real. A person who appears close to you and offers advice usually leaves almost immediately after. This is known as the third man factor, and it's very common for hikers climbing large, dangerous mountains to see another hiker warn them that it would be dangerous or that they would die, and then they vanish seconds later. You may have encountered this. You can Google it, and I might have something for this. When I was younger, maybe around 10 or so, I was at a family gathering. There are other accounts of people going through this kind of thing. One guy survived 9/11s against all odds, and he credits someone guiding him to the right elevators and encouraging him to keep going down. To leave the building, outside the venue, which was on the entrance to a very large field, my cousin, who is a year younger than me, and I were swinging on this large metal gate thing. It was late in the evening, so there was a full moon, and it was growing darker. We noticed a guy far into the field who was just glowing and radiating white, I mean. His skin, clothes, everything, and I remember standing there like, what the then? We shouted at him to get his attention, and he stopped looking in our direction. However, he stopped directly beneath the full moon and pointed up at the moon while staring at us, leaving us stunned and perplexed. He continued to walk across the field for about 10 seconds, and then he simply vanished behind a swing set. And I'm still not sure what that. My grandma had recently passed away when I was around 10 years old, and I didn't really know her because she had spent the majority of my childhood in a nursing home and frequently forgot who I was. However, when I visited, she would always rub my back, which seemed to be an automatic comforting gesture. I'm hoping it was some kind of costume, but it didn't look like it. Did it to all of her children and grandchildren for approximately a year after her death. Sometimes at night, when I was sitting alone in my room, I would feel someone rubbing my back the way she used to. This scared me until one night, when I acknowledged it and thanked Grandma, it stopped, and I never felt it again. My mom passed away a few years ago, and I was spending some time at my dad's house with my dad for a few months to take care of him, sleeping in her bed every night. As soon as I lay down, I felt someone sit down on the side of the bed, and I knew it was her. I didn't mind. I would cry myself to sleep because I missed her so much, and occasionally I would speak aloud to her. Eventually, it stopped happening, and I miss it. To be honest, I was walking home in 2003, in the afternoon. I was heading home from work when I happened to glance up on a cloudy day parallel to my direction. A meteor had burned up, leaving behind black smoke and a low-pitched rumbling sound throughout the entire sky. For the 3 seconds it took to travel that far before YouTube knew about it. Never mind anyone who saw it. Although I had witnessed meteor showers, I had never seen one this low or with such volume. I grew up in the country, and every day at around 8 p.m., I would go check on the chickens we kept in a henhouse in the garden. It was really exciting to see at the time, and I thought I was going to die. Everything wet as usual in the winter, with snow all over the place, until I noticed that someone was standing in front of me in the dark. I wished it were someone with red glowing eyes, and I told my parents, but they still don't believe me. A few years ago, I discovered that the previous owner of our home had committed suicide in the same spot in our garden. My friend and I were traveling from a show we were playing in Kona on the large island of Hawaii to Hilo Town via Saddle Road, one of the two routes that connect Kona to the opposite side of the island. Saddle Road is renowned for being a place of worship and a lot of strange things. It is roughly 40 kilometers long. Around 1 a.m., we went over the road, which was completely devoid of people and lights, except for lava rock. We were having fun and sharing stories when we noticed a large white dog with a gold chain staring at us from the side of the road. We passed and inquired if we had seen the same thing, and we were discussing whether to stop the road to pick it up. According to local legend, if you see an elderly woman on the road, you must pick her up, or else bad things will happen. We didn't stop and didn't talk until we got home. I asked a local guy what it might be, and he said it was the goddess Pea's pet. After doing some research, it appears that this dog has been spotted occasionally since the 1950s. Oh, my dad almost picked P. He and my mother were driving in the same neighborhood as you when they noticed a woman walking down the street with a dog. The father stopped and asked if she wanted a ride, but she said no. They continued a little further down the road, and my mother turned around because she didn't feel comfortable leaving the woman to walk. The woman is completely gone, with nowhere for her to go. About 4 or 5 years ago, I lived just outside of Detroit. For those who aren't familiar with the area, Detroit does have a lot of nice areas, but the city is still completely unfriendly. The city I'm in is actually quite nice and less than 5 minutes from Detroit. So I work there and enjoy going for nighttime jogs. It's cooler and there aren't many people around, which sounds dumb in Detroit. But I know the area well, and I don't wear headphones. About 15 minutes into my jog, I hear footsteps, not just feet, but full-fledged sprinting that is oddly loud. At this point, there is complete silence, but I usually can't hear footsteps if they're even on the same block as me. A big black man is ahead of me. That's pertinent to the story because he's dressed entirely in black, performing a full-fledged sprint, and he's about a block ahead of me. These blocks aren't that big, and the man has a big smile on his face. He's holding something steel, and all I can see are his teeth and the reflection of whatever he's holding from a street light. He's charging at me, and I didn't think I'd be done for if I ran with my back to him. So I kind of braced myself to fight for my life. When he was less than half a block away, he simply turned down an alley I didn't even know existed and vanished. So I ran back to my car. The next time I see someone on the news, I know what to do because, even though I'm in decent shape and 6 feet, this guy is obviously big and fast as wanted for murder, which is exactly what I saw. He was 6 feet tall, weighed 3,220 pounds, and looked exactly like what I saw. 4 days later, they found him. Since then, I have never gone for a jog in the city. One day, my parents were pushing my elderly Nana in her wheelchair. She was about 90 years old at the time, and Nana was telling my mom's daughter about how my mom's in a rather trivial way. Sister Karen's friend who lived in Spain was discovered dead at the bottom of the stairs, and her daughter was suspected of her murder. We didn't know the deceased woman or her daughter by name. Fast forward 2 years, and my parents are sitting in a pub when Karen calls them. She tells my mom everything concerning her friend's death at the foot of the stairs in Spain, with her daughter as the main suspect. My mother says, "I know Nana told me," and her sister stops talking. My grandmother had been dead for 18 months when Karen asked how she died last night. My mother went pale and handed the phone to my dad, who had only heard one side of the story so far and is as doubtful as they come, even though it only occurred a few hours prior and the circumstances were the same. My dad still shrugs and says, "Well, all I can say is it happened, and I can't explain it." It's the fact that he believes in nothing, no religion, no ghosts, nothing. My mom tells him to tell Karen what Nana said happened to her friend. So my dad tells her exactly what he heard had happened 2 years ago. This is the part of the story that scares me the most. To be honest, my uncle was sleeping on 9/11s and didn't realize it was happening. He had a nightmare in which he was in a plane that crashed into a building. He woke up to the news about the Twin Towers and forgot about it until I read your post, and brought home a 3-foot-tall, realistic doll that my grandparents had. I was going to fix it up, but I'm afraid of dolls. So I put it in a box and placed a heavy metal box on top of it. The next morning, the doll was gone. The boxes were still there, but the damn thing had vanished entirely. Please tell us that it was a Charlie McCarthy ventriloquist doll, but it was actually a pale-skinned, blue-eyed doll with open and closed eyes and really messed up curly hair. One of its arms had been torn off and sewn back on, and it had brown hair that was half torn out. I think it's important to note that I damaged it when I was 5 years old, trying to play with the girls with it. I experienced something similar when I was a teenager. My parents had 2 of these 4-foot-tall antique dolls that looked like children, and we would sometimes hide them around the house. Eventually, we stopped doing that. But one night I had a nightmare in my bedroom where one of the dolls was standing next to me, and I could feel its breath on my neck. I woke up with goosebumps all over my body, and since it was a school day, I went downstairs to take a shower. My mom placed one of the dolls behind the shower curtain so we could together, but it had been months since we had done that. The timing of the nightmare caused me to run back upstairs, lol. Okay, so it wasn't something I saw, but I was told someone else saw it. This is the story of my ex-girlfriend, who died years ago, before she passed away from me. My brother lived with me, and he had a large pit bull named Max. She loved animals and knew Max well. After I moved out, he got a girlfriend who had a child and needed the SPBIS. Well, that's established. In addition, my ex-girlfriend, who was in her 30s, had long blonde hair and was buried in a pink sweater a few months after she passed away. I was asked to watch the dog, feed him, and so on when my brother took them all on vacation. I said that I could, of course, and they kept him in a crate, which was in his girlfriend's daughter's room, which was a large basement space. I spent time with the dog before I had to leave, so I put him back in his crate. I felt bad about it, but I had to do it before I left, so I looked up at the sky and asked, "Meg, are you still around?" Max is going to be lonely, so I go home, and my brother returns. A few months later, I'm talking to his girlfriend, who is in her 30s, about ghosts, and she tells me that her house is haunted. I'm like, no way, I'm there all the time, and I've never seen anything. She tells me that it seemed to happen suddenly, and that she had only seen herself when Max is barking or freaking out for any reason. Her daughter, who is about 5 or 6 years old, tells her that sometimes she sees a woman about her mother's age, with long blonde hair and a pink sweater, who calms the dog. I'm pretty sure I invited a ghost into their home, but I'm really glad I did. I wish I could have seen her speech bubble, man, as it reminds me of my own story, which I'm sure I've already shared on Reddit. Beginning in early 2013, I was working in retail when we hired a new employee, a South American man about my age. We didn't really know him well, but during a shared break, we started talking and somehow ended up talking about everything supernatural. He hesitated for a while before telling me he could see spirits. He went on to describe my best friend to A after saying that he frequently saw one specific spirit following me around. To be clear, he didn't know me. I hadn't told him about her, and we weren't following each other on social media, and all of my profiles are private. In any case, there is absolutely no way he could have known how she looked, and my best friend's appearance was. When I was a child, I had a dog that was the smartest dog I've ever met. She was like a human trapped in a dog's body, and my brother and I found her wandering around our neighborhood after school. We brought her home, and she was adored. It wasn't particularly frightening, but I think it's pretty cool if she is actually watching over me, just relaxing. Would slowly walk in a circle around a plant in our living room, allowing the leaves to gently rub her back occasionally. She would pause and gaze up at the plant for a moment, as if she saw a ghost hovering over it, and she would get a dejected expression and whimper. I'm positive she was seeing my brother's ghost keeping watch over the dogs. They are incredibly intelligent, and sometimes I think they know more than we do. There's a term for the behavior you seem to be describing that is interesting, and no one can say for sure, but it's called ghost walking. I really love that dog. It sounds like she was a sweet girl who came into their lives at the right time. Say why dogs do it, as you mentioned, sensing your brother's presence, perhaps even just to comfort you as she remembers him. I'm sorry for your loss. It's not frightening, but it's inexplicable. When I was 10, I was in a motorcycle accident. I wasn't riding it. I was walking from school when a motorcycle struck me at full speed. I saw the motorcycle arrive, but I froze. I remember someone catching me when I fell, and when I got up and looked around, I saw no one. Witnesses told the police that I flew at least 6 feet and hit the ground head first, but my head was fine. Only my collarbone was broken. Fortunately, my parents believed me when I told them that I used to go night running pretty late, from 11 p.m. until 1 in the morning. The road I run on takes me into a valley close to my house at one point, where there are cemeteries on both sides and an abandoned Japanese Shinto temple. One night, I was jogging between the cemeteries, and I noticed an elderly Asian woman standing by a bus stop. She waved and said hello in a very slow and deliberate manner. I nodded and smiled at her before continuing to jog. My turnaround point was approximately 5 minutes past the bus stop, but by the time I turned around and ran back the way I had come, the woman had vanished. No buses or cars had passed me in either direction, and I didn't see her footing. When I ran up the road, she was there, and 5 minutes later, when I ran down the road, she was gone. At the time, I didn't think much of it, but later, I realized that the whole thing seemed really strange. Why was she there at such a late hour? Where did she go? Looking back at the strange way she waved and said hello to me makes me shiver. Needless to say, I changed my running route. When I was around 6 years old, I had a dream about an apartment with a lot of ghosts and other terrible, scary things in it. They then pulled me into a room and put me in a fire bin. When I turned 10, my dad and I moved to 100 miles away to the same apartment, and in my dream, the fire bin room was my bedroom. The apartment was a literal hell, too, since there were a lot of drug addicts and shady characters there. My dad's basement is finished, except for the storage room, which is eerily dark and eerie. It's located around the corner from the main room of the basement, and there's an elliptical there. If you stand on the elliptical and glance over your shoulder, you can see half of the door to when I felt like someone was standing behind me. While I was exercising on the said elliptical in the storage room, I turned to look over my shoulder and saw a dark figure with light gray eyes staring at me in the half doorway. Since I was house sitting, I knew no one else was home, so I carefully got off the elliptical and went into the bathroom to hide. Before deciding to be outside, I had previously seen that gray figure, with its enormous blue almond-shaped frontal eyes glowing in the dark through a barbed wire fence, bold and rushing past the storage room and back upstairs. I lived on a forest property in a country without large predatory animals, and this was after massive bushfires, so something that lived in the forest must have been flushed out. There was an abandoned house in the middle of nowhere, and it took about 30 minutes of back roads to find it, and no other people for at least 10 miles. In any direction. The local indigenous tribe claims that I saw a bunyip, but I have no idea what it was. The insects had also gone completely silent on the outskirts where we lived, and my instinct was overwhelming. Guidance. My friends and I used to go check out this eerie house and show it off to one or to new people at a time. We did this 3 or 4 times, and one night as we were pulling up, a light inside the house turned on. The house had no power during the time we had been there, and there were no cars around the house that night, which terrified us all so much that none of us ever went back in. A car might have been parked behind in an area we couldn't see from the road, but as high school kids were driving home with my family in a spooky house with mysterious lights. In hindsight, it was most likely being used as a hunting cabin or a meth house, though we never saw any signs of either. And they most likely just had the breaker off when they weren't there. A patch of black ice spun us out and slid us towards what would have been a 30 to 40 foot, nearly vertical drop down into a wood line. Before we reached the drop-off, the space between the front and rear passenger side doors was completely crumpled enough for us to see. This happened late after a day of skiing, because my father likes to drive too fast for the conditions, and it was just beginning to snow heavily. Outside, stopping us on the shoulder of the road is strange because when we go outside, there are no guardrails, street signs, or anything else to hit. What's even stranger is that it didn't feel like a crash. In some of the ones I've been in, we went from 65 miles per hour to a complete stop with the force of what it feels like to pull into a parking space. The car looked like something I would have seen in an Avengers movie. If Iron Man had reached out to stop it, it's difficult to describe, but I firmly believe that a higher power intervened when I was a child because both of my parents left early for work, so they would drop me off at my grandmother's for breakfast. One more foot and we would have been over the edge and probably dead. And continue to school. My grandmother passed away during my junior year of high school, and I began returning home straight from school. At this point, my mother began to complain that the 80s corded push-button phone set next to her bed was not turned on when she got home from work. I wasn't using the phone, but she insisted that I must have been, because the phone was correctly hung up when she left for work one day, and I arrived home a little early. Now, I need to take a moment to explain how our apartment is laid out. From the front door, I could see the dining room, living room, kitchen door, and the short hallway leading to my parents' bedroom. In my bedroom, there was only one door, and the windows were vintage narrow casement windows, with screens, and we were on the 3rd floor anyhow. I heard the footsteps in my parents' bedroom as soon as I walked in. I dropped my school bag and rashly ran to the bedroom, which was only a short distance away. And when I arrived, I saw that no one was there, but that the phone receiver on my mother's bedside table was on the floor, positioned so that the base's cord was extended as far as it could go. I then attempted to duplicate the arrangement by shaking the table, tipping the phone, etc. But I was never able to remove the receiver from the base. Only by using my finger to knock it off would it fall on the table or next to it. Stretch the cord carefully, place it, and hold it for a few seconds. It couldn't have gotten there by accident. When I found the phone, I hung it up, and it rang right away. I answered it, and my dad answered. I asked him what was wrong, and he explained that he had called, apparently right before I got home, and someone answered the phone, thinking it was me, but he never said. I've never been able to figure out what happened, but I'm positive that I heard footsteps, and that no one was around. The windows in the bedroom were not disturbed, and my parents had too much stuff in the closet and under the bed for anyone larger than an infant to hide. Whatever happened, he finally hung up and tried to call back, but only succeeded after I hung up the phone. In any case, my mother never found the phone again after this. I was around 12 years old at the time, and every year when I visited family in Nova Scotia, my parents and I would drive from Montreal. Since we had always taken the Trans-Canada route, we decided to take a different route, traveling southeast through Maine before continuing to New Brunswick and finally Nova Scotia. There was a growing fear in the car that we might run out of gas, because we were in a very remote area and hadn't seen a house in a long time. I can't recall the name of the road, but it was a country road with mountains on the right side that went straight up through dense bush. And on the left there was dense bush in a steep downhill where, although it was a sunny day, the road was shaded except for spots where the sun would peek through the trees. Hanging over the hill, I could see a river at the base of the cliff, about 75 to 100 feet down the hill. I heard my dad ask Mom, "What is that up ahead?" And as I leaned over to look up the road, we could all see what appeared to be a man off in the distance when we were rolling down the road. This guy or whatever it was crossed the road in both lanes, and you didn't take 3 or 4 steps. One of you on the other side of the road simply disappeared into the woods. When we reached the spot where he had crossed, Dad slowed down to look around, but there was no sign of anyone. In the mid-1990s, I worked as a radio DJ at a small hometown radio station. It was a small building in the middle of a field with a 500-foot antenna out back, and a single road from the main road to the front door. No one knows what they saw, but 30 years later, it is brought up every couple of years, and the feelings are mutual __ strange and eerie. The transmitter was located directly behind my studio, behind sound-absorbing glass, and it had a light bulb that was always on. The transmitter room had only 2 doors, the front door and the back door, and the doors were always locked. The transmitter room was so tiny that you could see the light bulb inside, from the driveway on SL roadway. Since I started working the evening shift at 5 p.m., it has been hard to enter the door from the outside. Till 10 o'clock p.m., since I was always the last person on the air after my shift, I had to pull advertising for the first time after we really went off the air for the night. After working there for about a year, I had accumulated a few strange experiences, like shadows running around in the corner of my vision and lights going out. And one evening after getting in and taking over the board, I was just sitting there mentally preparing for the next 5 hours. I looked out the window for an hour or two of the morning show, cleaning dishes, finishing up some production work, etc. I saw the perfect shadow shape of a man who was probably 6 feet tall as I was walking toward the front door of the studio. I went to my boss, who wasn't always nice, and said, "So, I have a weird question." She sighed and looked at me expectantly. But I've never had the feeling that someone who wasn't my boss was here and shouted for someone to enter across the building. When that individual arrived at her office, she tilted her head in my direction and said, "I saw Jimmy." It was said that everyone had seen Jimmy, the original owner of the radio station, who occasionally stopped by. He wouldn't harm you. He was just checking in on the station. From that point on, Jimmy would make appearances. He was a harmless presence. My studio faced another unutilized studio, and he would turn on the lights. You see, there was another evil entity that also resided at the station. It had no name, and it was about Shanghai. I would say hello to Jimmy a few times, and everything would be fine, but then it would stop. He turned on a water faucet once, whispering my name in my ear one night, which scared me. At least I believe it was him. He was the one who would dart next to me, and I always knew it was there because I would get really scared. One night in particular was the scariest I've ever been here, and even now, 30 years later, I still can't explain it. As soon as everyone had left the building for the evening, I simply turned on all the lights in the sales office. A dot matrix printer began operating on its own, something that never happened, and the office was locked. The ceiling tiles began to move up as if someone struck them with a broom handle, and they began closest to me from my studio. The lights turned up the music, and I tried to ignore it, but the longer the night went on, the worse it got. Down the hall and came to the front door, which was locked. The front door opened, and I went to close and relock it. As I did so, I noticed through the door window that there was a cigar and a coffee cup on the front step. They had no business there. On my way back to the studio, I smelled a strong puff of cigar smoke, which was like invisible smoke, cloud in my face. I knew I had to do my regular tasks, but I didn't care at this point. I got off the air, grabbed my keys, and backed up. I then ran to my car, backed up, and looked through the front door. I saw a figure standing inside, silhouetted in front of the transmitter light. I peeled out and went straight home. Now, all of that is messed up, but it's not the most. I don't know how it happened, but I still believe that it might have been a prank. When I got home and told my mother the entire story, my heart was still racing, and she was all showy. But it's absolutely impossible that someone didn't somehow sneak in and play a very elaborate prank on me. Okay, there's a very slim chance that someone did. When it's time for bed, I go to my bedroom and call ABBS to tell someone what happened to me. While I was typing the story, my modem speaker turned on. If you're old enough to remember dial-up modems, you know that the speaker doesn't just turn on once the connection is established. It doesn't even turn back on. If someone in the house answered the phone, you saw a lot of bad data on the screen. When your modem disconnects, the speaker turns on. A voice comes from it mixed with the data connection's static, and it screeches, "Help me." The speaker then turns off, and nothing else changes on my screen. I remember the screech as if it were yesterday, and I have no idea why. My mom was the only one who could explain it. It was the scariest night of my life. And even though I am as skeptical as you can be about anything ghost or UFO related, that night is beyond my comprehension. As a sort of footnote to all of this, I occasionally return to that station when I visit my family, because she couldn't have done something like that. The staff knows that Jimmy, the tiny scary one, is still working there and is well known to them. Claims to have seen him